You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. Before we get into the meat of our topics, and we have several, and they're sort of blockbuster today here on the program, I want to just mention the tornadoes that have hit the South over the weekend. And, you know, we have a lot of stations in the South, so a lot of our listeners perhaps have been affected by this. And so I just want to send our prayers to the Lord for those that have been affected. A lot of people out of power today, so you may not be listening, or hopefully you are. But just know that we are with you and hoping that you are okay. And ladies and gentlemen, speaking of okay, there's a little boy who his dad would love him to be okay, but there's a battle over his sexuality. Is he a boy? He is a boy. He's a biological boy. One of his parents in a custody battle thinks he is a girl and wants to make him a girl, and it's a battle we've covered here on Point of View, and we're going to give you an update today. The father in the situation, Jeff Younger, is with me. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Jeff, we laid out the situation at length, and you joined me in the studio here. A little boy, a Dallas boy, 6 years old, one of twins. You've got twin sons. And you're no longer married to the mother, but this mother insists that little James is a girl and is doing everything she can to keep your influence, your Christian influence, over him, away from him. What's happened? I know that there has been, since I've talked to you, the conclusion of sort of a custody examination and also a hearing. So tell us what's happened.
Yeah, so currently, just to recap a little bit, I am not allowed to try to convince James that he's actually a boy. The court has enjoined me from that and will send me to jail if I try to do that. I'm not allowed to present him as a boy to anybody who knows him as a girl, which prevents me from taking part in school or anything like that. And I can't cut his hair without court permission. It costs me between $1,800 and $2,500 every time I want to cut my son's hair. Ms. George List wants to let his hair grow long,
which is his mom.
Hyperfeminize him. Right. Ann George List is his mom. She's a pediatrician in Capella. She wants to hyperfeminize him before trial, so she's really trying to keep me from cutting his hair. Her latest attempt to keep the public from knowing what she's asking the court to do is she filed a motion to seal. We had a court date on the 28th, but Ann George List backed down on that court date. They canceled it the day before. They canceled the day before because it creates maximum legal fees for me. We had to get ready for a hearing and had to pay all the lawyers for that. But they backed down at the last minute. I can only think of two reasons.
Does backing down mean that they are relinquishing their request for the motion to seal?
That is correct. They withdrew the motion.
And what is that? What would that mean? What does that mean? What is for the layman?
That would mean that all court documents in depositions, records of testimony from court reporters, all of the motions in the trial, everything would be made private, and no party to the litigation would be able to reveal those documents to the public.
So that's no longer an issue?
Not an issue now. They can file it later, but it's, I can only think of two reasons. Either the judge is not inclined to seal the record, or he just doesn't want to change anything about the temporary orders. We made arguments that there was massive public interest in an open trial on this matter because of the public outcry around this, that people have a right to know what the courts are doing. And we also argued that Rule 21C of the Texas Rules of Civil Procedure already provides a layer of protection for the boys. And I think they just found that probably the judge wasn't going to be very open to changing these things. You know, I've been very critical of Judge Beecham's order, which is, you know, has prior restraints on my parental speech and everything, but I've also always been careful to let everybody know that I think Judge Beecham is one of the most procedurally fair judges I've encountered in the legal system, and I haven't encountered many fair ones, to be honest with you.
Are you because of this, are you more hopeful?
Yes, I think everybody right now is basically waiting for the custody evaluation from Dr. Albrecht.
Is the evaluation done and just being written up now?
It's not completed, actually. My boys just finished their last session with Dr. Albritton. I have at least one more session. I know that collateral witnesses have not yet been interviewed, so this could go on a lot longer.
So that is a key piece to this whole puzzle, in a sense, is finishing a custody evaluation. And, you know, if there's fairness in this world, that evaluation will show you as the concerned and loving father that you are. And I know now, for our listeners who weren't listening the day you were in studio with me, you have a very small percentage of time with your twin sons compared to mom, right?
Right. I have about 20%. And that's the standard custody schedule in Texas. And so I'm trying to counter all of this, you know, these lies that she's told my son since he was 2 years old, that he's actually a girl. She's been telling him that since he was 2. And I just have very little time to do that. And so I spend all of my time, I can't try to convince him he's a boy, but I can read him Genesis. You know, I can't try to convince him he's a boy, but I can read him the gospel.
Because what would happen if he told someone that you were trying to convince him that he was a boy? What would happen to you?
The court has been very blunt and clear with me that if I'm in violation, if I do that, I'm in contempt of court and I'm going to the county jail.
Wow. All right. I think that's why you have such a following now, because folks they see this as just eminently unfair. If people want to read more about this case, you can read court documents and court orders and all of this, and it's so fascinating, ladies and gentlemen. How do they do so, Jeff?
Well, the best way to do it is to go to savejames.com, and there's a resources tab at the top, and it has all of the court documents there. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe third parties. You can actually go and see. We even put up the transcript, the court reporter's transcript from the July 10th hearing with my testimony and Ann Georgelis's testimony, where she says exactly what she wants to do to James.
Which is?
She wants to she wants to socially transition him to a girl. That means she wants to tell him he's a girl, dress him as a girl, and have everybody know him as a girl, and force everyone to use female pronouns. If I refuse to do that, she wants me to lose my parental rights. She doesn't want me to be able to have overnight stays with James. She wants to limit my ability to provide religious instruction to him. And she wants the court to order me to a transgender indoctrination class, where if I don't get a high enough score in agreement with it, 1, I can be sanctioned by the court up to jail, and 2, my parental rights would be further curtailed.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is where this LGBT, and now the T is definitely prominent in this agenda. This is where it takes us. It takes us to the point where even a little boy who, and we will talk about this in the next segment, he, I've heard the adjective violently used. He violently insists he's a boy unless he's with his mother or in the places that she controls, like school. His name is James. She calls him Luna. It is lunacy. We'll talk about it right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Will Orthodox Bible-believing Christians find it harder and harder to buy and sell in America? If you asked that question a few decades ago, people would think you lost all rationality. But that is a question Rod Dreyer rightly asked in a recent editorial. He points to the decision by Vanco Payment Solutions to cut off services to a Christian ministry because it is listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate map. The Ruth Center is a Catholic nonprofit located in Louisiana, flagged because the service company believed it promoted hate, violence, harassment, and/or abuse. Now, you can go to the ministry's website and see that it does not even come close to promoting anything like that. People in the ministry believe what the Roman Catholic Church teaches about homosexuality. And because they support traditional marriage and biblical sexuality, the Southern Poverty Law Center tagged them as a hate group. The Washington Free Beacon has been looking into the Southern Poverty Law Center and found that it has become a fundraising powerhouse by expanding its list of domestic hate groups. It recorded more than $50 million in contributions and $328 million in net assets. The group also has financial interest in the Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, and Bermuda. An article in Politico says that you might imagine that the Southern Poverty Law Center as a handful of scrappy lawyers in a dingy office suite somewhere. In fact, it boasts 250 staffers and offices in 4 states, and its main office is the most architecturally striking structure in downtown Montgomery. At one time, the Southern Poverty Law Center provided a necessary function of identifying true hate groups. Today, it slaps the label indiscriminately on ministries and organizations like the Ruth Center that do not deserve it. This, in turn, makes them a target, and they lose vital services. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. A little bit later in this segment, Jonathan Saenz from Texas Values will be joining me. We're going to be talking about what's happening in the Texas legislature, especially these Ban the Bible bills, and it really relates to what I'm discussing now with Jeff Younger. In fact, James Wesselak from Texas Values wrote about this particular case. He writes, I hope you have heard about the heartbreaking case out of Dallas where a young boy is dressed like a girl by his mother but acts like a boy with his father. The mother, who is separated from the father, is threatening the father with legal action. She's already launched it. If he discourages his son's transgenderism. And so this relates now with what's going on with the rights of Christians, especially with regard to counseling over either sexual orientation or transgender feelings. A lot of states are banning that kind of counseling that would help people deal with those type of feelings. People that don't want these type of feelings, they're unwanted, but the counseling that would help them get back on track biblically is being banned in many states, and there's a possibility it might happen in Texas. So there's just so much right now with regard to these issues swirling around, and I think this case, and my guest is Jeff Younger. Jeff, I think this case, in your case, in your tragic situation, but I think you're doing so many things well, and pray for the outcome. I think it puts a face on this, on what could really happen in a culture when you drop all biblical and just traditional views of gender and sexuality, doesn't it?
It does, and it's amazing that you brought this up. I honestly didn't know you were going to be discussing the attempts to ban, conversion therapy. But there's the post that was just put up on SaveJames.com today is parents despair over transgender child abuse, and it highlights an article from the public discourse where parents, in their own words, talk about this, and the very first quote is about conversion therapy bans. It says, "I have nowhere to go for proper help. Therapists are actively trained and socially pressured not to question these increasingly common identities. In Washington, D.C., where this woman lives, and many states with so-called conversion therapy bans, questioning a child's belief that she is of the opposite sex is against the law. And she could lose her child for doing that." So
so you could never question the child's statements about this?
Correct, because that would be considered conversion therapy. That's what they're doing, actually, in Oregon. They're starting to take children from parents. Wow. And it's already been happening in Canada. One of the things that Christians are really going to have to come to grips with here is that they are coming for your kids. And they know that if they can get your kids, they can crush the traditional Christian ways of life in this country. And they're very intent on doing it. There's going to be a post on Save James. I saw a draft of it, which talks about who is funding this transgender child abuse movement. There's an article at the Federalist, an investigative article, and they did a really good job. It's who are the rich white males funding the transgender movement. And you're going to find that it's a massive number of leftist billionaires. Warren Buffett among them, a couple of transgendered billionaires who were men who became women, and they're laundering their money through very shady political donation companies that sort of hide where the money comes from. And they've been very successful in lobbying these professional organizations. And as we talked last time, Christians have to care what these professional bodies think, because in many courts, these professional bodies, their views have the force of law. So in family court, the APA's recommendations for the treatment of transgender children are taken by the courts almost verbatim. And the courts just enter orders in accordance with prevailing practice from the American Psychological Association. So you have to care about what these professional bodies are doing. And the last thing I would say is just remember, the left is not in a political debate. Like, they're not here to try to convince you that this is the best thing for kids. What they're going to do is they're going to take over these institutions and make you do this with your kids, whether you like it or not. You can take them out of public schools. It doesn't matter. There's one of the quotes on Save James is a woman who sent her child off to summer camp, and she came back believing that she was a boy and had a whole new vocabulary, a changed name, and that's because they put her in a cabin with girls who are transitioning to boys. It doesn't matter if you take your kids out of public schools. They're going to find a way to coerce you, and you just have to come to grips with that. You either have to take back these institutions or support alternatives.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just an ideological debate anymore. This has real consequences for real people. And so I have Jeff Younger on the phone. His son is James Younger. And Jeff, just before we have to let you go, and we have to keep continuing following this story, and we will, ladies and gentlemen. But what will happen to James if you are not able to prevail and get more influence over how he's raised? What will happen with regard to this whole gender transition issue?
Okay, I'm going to lay it out for you in just the starkest terms. What will happen when he's between 8 and 10, probably at 8. That's only 2 years from now, really maybe a year and a half from now. They will put James on hormone blockers, which are chemical castration drugs. They're the same ones they use for rapists. They will prevent the growth of his sexual organs. He will then not go into puberty. He will not mature into a man. His growth will be stunted. His skeleton will not grow properly. His brain functioning will not mature in a normal way. When he reaches the age of 15, they will then surgically transition him. They will cut his penis off. They will pull out the tissue inside of it, invert it, and create an artificial vagina for him. If he's like some of the other kids who went on puberty blockers young, his penis will have not grown. It will be too small, and they won't be able to construct a fake vagina from it. So they will take part of his forearm to create a fake vagina.
Wow.
So if I had to summarize it, they will chemically castrate him and then sexually mutilate him.
And then he'll be on hormones the rest of his life?
He has to be on hormones the rest of his life. And the suicide rates are upwards of 70% after these surgeries. So effectively, my son will be chemically castrated, sexually mutilated, live a tortured life, and kill himself.
Wow. And this father, ladies and gentlemen, is desperately trying to stop this from happening. You can find out more. You can weigh in. You can contribute financially to the legal fees and stay on top of this by going to SaveJames.com. Jeff, how can we just pray for you personally as you pursue this battle?
You know, in your daily prayers, just please remember James and Jude in your prayers. You know, God listens to prayers. God listens to the faithful. Also, you know, even though I still find myself incapable of doing it at this point, please pray for Ann Georgelis, that she will see that this is wrong, and that she will change her ways and come back to the church. And pray for all the experts involved, that the Lord God Almighty will enlighten them and make them good judges.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are things that legislatures can do too, and we still have a fairly conservative state, so there's possibilities of introducing legislation. For instance, this whole idea of introducing puberty blockers and sex change surgery to young kids who are minors. They may say they want it, especially after they're given puberty blockers. They may want sex change surgery because they've already been pushed along this path. But I think we need to work in that field too, especially in the states like Texas, where we still have some people who have some common sense that are our elected officials. Because if Texas, I mean, as in so many issues, if Texas doesn't go the right direction, the rest of the country pretty much doesn't have a lot of hope. So, Jeff, the battle that you're waging right now is for your son, James, but it's going to affect the real child abuse of children across the nation. So thank you for waging it, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to clarify one thing with regard to this case, and that is they're twin boys, James and Jude. Jude is not in question. His mom recognizes that he's a boy, but she's trying to change the other son. This is pretty sick, but it's really happening. So we will continue to keep you posted on that. Next up, Jonathan Saenz is going to join me. And also in the next hour, I want to mention we're going to do a full hour on socialism with Frank Wright. He's with D. James Kennedy Ministries, and he has a lot of, actually some real Christian common sense and biblical truth to share with us. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View.
The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
In the last segment, I mentioned an article out of the Federalist by James Wesolek, who is with Texas Values. It's called Texas Democrats Seek to Ban Christianity Using So-Called Anti-Discrimination Laws. It's posted at pointofview.net. You can see it there. And we're going to discuss some of the issues inside this article, especially these anti-discrimination laws that are mentioned in the title. Some people are calling these ban the Bible laws. And they really don't ban the Bible, but they certainly are detrimental to the rights of Christians to practice their faith. With me to discuss this and other issues before the Texas legislature is Jonathan Saenz, and he is an attorney. He's president of Texas Values, which is a nonprofit group dedicated to preserving and advancing a culture of family values in Texas. He's a regular and frequent guest here on Point of View. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, Penna, great to be with you.
It's good to have you. What is the, we really need an update, because I know that you've been on several times discussing these ban the Bible laws that some folks in the legislature are introducing. What's the status?
Well, look, they continue to get a lot of attention, and Democrats continue to file more of these bills. So apparently they think the answer is more government and more government control and to grow government on these issues when it relates to sexual orientation and gender identity laws. And so, look, over 40,000 emails have been sent to the legislature opposing these sexual orientation and gender identity bills that would give special protection for people that are based on their self-perception of sexual orientation and gender identity. And they would be used, this legislation, they're designed to be used as weapons against people of faith, because they know that Bible-believing Christians that believe that the Bible says marriage is between one man and one woman and that God made people male and female, they don't just have that view in their mind. They talk about it, and many of them act on it, and they live their life according to those things. Well, these sexual orientation, gender identity bills would allow the government to punish people that live their life based on those beliefs. And so just to give you a couple of examples.
Yeah, that's what we need.
And the reason that you've heard the phrase ban the Bible is because if the government bans you from acting based on your beliefs of what the Bible says on marriage and sexuality, it is a ban. I mean, it's effectively a ban on you following what the Bible says. So just to give you an example, there's an article out about a Christian women's shelter in Alaska that is now in the middle of a lawsuit because a sexual orientation and gender identity government policy is being used to force this Christian women's shelter to allow biological men to stay there with women that have suffered abuse and have suffered harm at the hands of men. Now they've got to literally lay next to a man in a setting where they're trying to seek shelter and they're trying to seek some privacy and they're trying to seek some security. We know about the case of Jack Phillips, the Christian cake baker who went up to the U.S. Supreme Court because he didn't want to be forced by the government to create a message on a custom cake on marriage. The government tried to. The source for that government action was a sexual orientation and gender identity. We call them SOGI, S-O-G-I, a SOGI policy, a government policy. That's what Jack Phillips was being punished by. And one of these pieces of legislation, House Bill 517, would go into the realm of Christian counselors. So, this also relates to Christians. So if you're a private counselor and someone comes to have a private counseling session with you and they want the Bible to be used and they want to talk to you about how they want to resist same-sex attraction, or they want to have a conversation because their child is a boy, but they think maybe they're a girl, or someone's trying to influence them to think that way, and they want to have a conversation, and they simply want to live their life based on what the Bible says and stay a boy or stay a male or not act on same-sex attraction. House Bill 517 would say no. Christian counselors, they cannot do that. They cannot use a Bible to have a discussion. And I don't know about your listeners, but the people we've talked to, it's very common for a private counselor to use the Bible and to invoke prayer during a counseling session. These SOGI policies that they're trying to push at the legislature right now for sexual orientation, gender identity, these would allow the government to punish people and to ban these counselors, the government would tell them, you cannot use those as sources during your counseling sessions.
Just before you joined us, Jeff Younger was with us. He's the father of the 6-year-old Dallas boy who's the subject of a custody battle. The father is trying to convince, or not convince, he's not allowed to try to convince this little boy that he is a boy. The little boy knows he's a boy, but the mother has taught him that he's a girl. And I'm sure you know the case, Jonathan, and they're battling this whole agenda, this idea that his counseling all has to affirm the feminine side of it, the girl side that the mother wants to encourage. It's a terrible, terrible, sad story. But, you just told us about the women's shelter in Alaska. That's another sad story. You just told us about Jack Phillips. He did win his Supreme Court case, but it wasn't a definitive win for the whole country. So we have a battle on our hands here. And I'm looking at something, well, I get your emails, and I'm looking at a release from Texas Values Action, the number of bills that have been filed that just go to each one of these areas of Christian rights to live their lives according to biblical values. It's a growing list.
Well, it's the highest number I can recall seeing. I've been doing work at the state legislature since 2007. And so I think people need to be aware of how, the level of concern here. And that's why 40,000 emails have been sent to the House and Senate members saying that they oppose these sexual orientation and gender identity bills and these laws. And, but some people aren't getting the message. Now, some are. There are a lot of House members that have sent out letters. They sent out emails saying, thank you. I would never support this legislation. And they've also recognized these bills are a threat to religious freedom. And that's how many of them are designed. And I'm not saying everyone that supports them, but a lot of people that support these bills and come up with ideas for sexual orientation and gender identity laws, they do them because they want to use them as weapons against people of faith. And they want people's views on sexual orientation, gender identity to take precedent or to win in any type of conflict for religious freedom. So if you take an example, the point you were making about Jeff Younger, this gentleman, if there's a local law or some type of ordinance or a state law that says that you can't discriminate or you can't do anything that appears prejudicial, or if you have a different view of someone based on sexual orientation, gender identity, in a situation like this, and someone says, well, I'm just following my religious liberty rights. I'm not trying to harm anyone. I'm not trying to push my values on someone else. I'm just trying to raise my child based on my religious beliefs. The government, with these sexual orientation and gender identity laws, would be able to say, well, too bad, because we have a law that says that when it comes to someone's sexual orientation and gender identity, we now are going to override your religious liberty rights. That's not a valid reason that you can offer. And that's what some people want the government to do. They want the government to pick a winner and loser, and they don't want just everyone to coexist, if you will, and to respect the fact that we're going to have different views every time. And that doesn't mean you get to win in court. That means everyone has to respect each other, and people live their individual lives without the government punishing someone.
Jonathan, you have ways to help people weigh in on this with their representatives, don't you?
Absolutely. Well, you can go to txvaluesaction.org to see the work that we're doing as far as getting involved in the legislative process. We actually have an upcoming day at the Texas Capitol, the Faith and Family Day, March 13th, at the Texas Capitol. You can come in person. We're going to have Lieutenant Colonel Allen West is one of our rally speakers. David B. Wright, who started the 40 Days for Life movement, is going to be there. Senator Kelly Hancock. Also, one of our newest state representative, Candy Noble, who's just filed a very important piece of legislation to protect issues of life. That is a full day briefing in the morning about what's going on at the Capitol. Then we're going to have a rally at noon, and then we're going to have a Chick-fil-A lunch, and then we're going to turn people loose in the Capitol so they can contact their elected officials directly. So that's March 13th, the Texas Faith and Family Day, or people can go to our website right now, txvalues.org, to get involved.
Ladies and gentlemen, after the break, we're going to discuss some of the other issues that the legislature is considering. But I think for the purposes of point of view, these ban the Bible bills are a big threat. You can take action and contact your legislator just by going to pointofview.net, and you can click through to the Texas Values website. And right there, the first item There's a picture of an open Bible. You can take action on this and make your voice heard. And I think that's going to make a big difference with the folks down there that are serving us. I might mention in Texas, in case you don't know this, we have a legislature that meets every other year for 5 months. So it's meeting right now. This is our opportunity. And it's also the opportunity for the left to get some really bad mischief made. And they're trying to. We have an LGBT caucus now in our legislature. Although the Texas House and Senate are both Republican, the House lost a few people. And I can discuss this with Jonathan afterwards, but it makes it more important that we really stay on top of these leftist agendas that try to work their way into Texas. We'll talk about this and more right after this break.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Donna Dunbar and her husband Clarence love to serve their community in Port Charlotte, Florida. They founded a soup kitchen at which they donated over 4,000 volunteer service hours, an act that won them the President's Volunteer Service Award. But things aren't as rosy at their condominium. Donna is a lay minister in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. She welcomes a few of her friends to the social room at her condo each week for a Bible study. The room is used by lots of people. Some play games there. There's a weekly poker game and even a regular movie night for all to attend. Until recently, Donna's Bible study was no big deal. But without any announcement or warning, the Condo Association Board adopted a resolution putting an end to the use of the common areas of the condo for religious purposes, including Donna's Bible study. Someone even put a sign on the organ in the room that said, "Any and all Christian music is banned." First Liberty Institute filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development alleging that Donna's condo broke the law with such a discriminatory policy and asking Secretary Ben Carson to undertake an investigation into the matter. After all, such unequal treatment of citizens shows hostility to religion and violates federal law and the First Amendment. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jonathan Saenz is with me, and he is president of Texas Values. He's working in Austin, Texas, to really watch over this legislature and make sure that a lot of mischief that has been threatened is not actually foisted on our state. And one of the great events coming up is the Countdown to Texas Faith and Family Day, March 13th. It's free, right, Jonathan?
That's right. We do. There is a $5 fee if you want our Chick-fil-A box lunch, which I highly recommend.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so folks can come. Do they sign up? They sign up through your website, right?
Yes, you can go to txvalues.org, or you can go to the event website, texasfaithandfamily.com.
Great, and that's also linked through pointofview.net. So It'd be fun, and you can be with a lot of conservatives and Christians down there and eat Chick-fil-A and hear speakers. So I would recommend.
Well, and hopefully that's, if the government doesn't ban Chick-fil-A, since it's a Christian-owned business, before we get there, maybe someone locally might try to. But I know that shouldn't happen at the Texas Capitol.
I want to add one more thing about this SOGI, Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity Agenda, and that is that a lot of these provisions that are being introduced, they would be forced on business owners. But business owners in Texas are free to have the types of policies regarding sexual orientation and gender identity that they want to have. That would not change. Businesses should and can do what they want. But this is more of a top-down, state-mandated set of policies that would violate the rights of Christian business owners, right?
That's right. I mean, you're talking about in the labor code, the property code, housing code, all kinds of areas of state government law. And so, and your point is really good too, Penna, because, look, there's the freedom out there that private business owners can decide if they want to use their funds to subsidize same-sex benefits for same-sex partners, if they want to create special policies and allow people to use whatever bathroom they want and just leave those bathrooms open when people work at those businesses and things of that nature. If they want to tell people, that there are certain things that they can hang in their office that supports LGBT rights, and, these private businesses can do that. But apparently that's not enough for some people. They not only want private businesses that they like to continue to do that, they want to force every other business and nonprofit ministries as well to have to follow this same ideology, and to when it comes to the way they do things. And so if you think about it, I mentioned the point about the women's shelter. Also, this would apply to dormitories, where there are a lot of dormitories, particularly in private universities, where they have just for men or just for women. And in a lot of these abuse shelters, particularly these abuse shelters where you're commonly find women there. And so these laws, and I just want to list a couple of these bill numbers: House Bill 244, House Bill 254, Senate Bill 151, House Bill 1190, House Bill 517, just to give you an idea of some of the bad numbers to be aware of. But they want the government to control these issues. They want the government to punish people if they do not have the same ideology when it comes to these type of situations. And you'll hear them sometimes say, oh, well, there's a religious exemption in place, and so it doesn't apply to religious entities. Well, it depends on how that's worded. And a lot of times the way we see it worded is very narrow, it's very limited, and then you got to go to court to prove that, to say, oh, no, wait, we're a religious prophet. This doesn't apply to us. After you've spent who knows how much time. I mean, look at Jack Phillips. The guy's been litigating this issue for years, and now he's back in court because someone wants to force him to make a transition, to celebrate their gender transition with a whole bunch of colors and design and messages. And so the sexual orientation, gender identity supporters, they want the government to tell you what to do with your private ministry and your private business. And so this is a huge growth of government. This is government control. And this is the type of control that many people in the sexual orientation and gender identity movement years ago said that's not what they wanted. They just wanted the government to
They
leave
wanted
them
to
alone.
live and let live.
Yes.
They wanted
no
tolerance. Yeah, where's the tolerance?
So we need to be aware of that.
All right. So this is huge. And folks, again, you can go to pointofview.net, link through to Texas Values. They have information on all of these bills, and they have a way for you to also oppose this agenda. So, and it's very simple to be able to do that. But Jonathan Saenz, while I still have you, what else are you following there at the Texas legislature?
Well, look, I mean, there's, to our point, too, a lot of this is coming up because local governments like the city of Carrollton, the city of Dallas, they keep pushing these types of sexual orientation and gender identity laws that they have no proof that are really needed. They don't have any complaints to show to say it's necessary to do this. And a lot of times when they do it, they don't listen to the public. In Carrollton, they took a vote on this issue and then allowed for public testimony. We see the same thing on the life issue. We see the local government.
They took the vote first before a public testimony?
Yes. They took the vote first and then said, now we'll allow public testimony. But we saw some of the same disrespect or similar here in the city of Austin, where our office is located just 2 blocks from the Capitol, where the city of Austin said they wanted to start using tax dollars to give Planned Parenthood a free rent, essentially, in a government building, to allow them to rent a government building for $1 a year for 20 years and a possible 20-year renewal after that. And so a major subsidization. I mean, this is like valued at almost $40 million if you
so what happened to that?
Years. Well, so there's a bill that's been filed, House Bill 1929, that says you're not allowed to do that. The state of Texas has a policy that our tax dollars are not used for abortion entities. House Bill 1929 would enforce that policy at our state and not allow local governments to have a loophole to get around it.
You know, sometimes the cities, sometimes we get some good laws at the state level, and then agendas come in from local entities, correct?
You see it. You do. And you'll hear the phrase, oh, what about local control? Well, the problem is these local governments, they're not allowing people to have control. When the city of Carrollton takes the vote and then allows the public, so to speak, to testify later, that's not local control. That's local tyranny.
Mm-hmm. So really, elected officials and debate in city councils, debate at planning commissions, all those kinds of things are local control. But city officials foisting a liberal agenda or a SOGI agenda on citizens is not local control.
Well, it's not. And I think what you're seeing, too, there's some pushback about that. A lot of these local governments are using tax dollars to then come down to the Capitol in Austin and lobby against some common sense measures that the people in their cities want. People are just not aware of that. So we're seeing a lot more highlight about how your own tax dollars are being used to charge you more taxes, to raise your tax rates. And so a lot of people feel like the local governments, they're way out of control. They're getting involved in issues that they really are not well suited to handle. They don't have a lot of expertise. When we testified on this issue in Carrollton on the sexual orientation, gender identity, there was a lot of misstatements of the law. They're not aware of a lot of litigation on these SOGI bills and a lot of things that are going on at the federal level. They're just not well equipped to do it, and that's a big reason why it should be left at the state level, where you have folks that have heard these issues before, they're involved, they testify, and we actually have a transparent process at the state capitol versus what you see sometimes at the local level.
Yeah, we're thankful for that, and for you, Jonathan, for keeping us abreast of these issues. And I know that you regularly come either into our studio or join us by phone to help us understand what's going on in Texas. I think it's very important during this legislative session. So thanks for joining me today.
Well, we appreciate it. We've got someone at the Capitol every day, and we've got members of our team around the state. If we can be helpful, and we hope to see as many people at our Faith and Family Day on March 13th at the Texas Capitol.
So there you've got the invitation to go to Austin, and it ought to be fun. It's free except for $5 for Chick-fil-A. And so some of you might want to do that. Otherwise, just go to pointofview.net, click through to Texas Values to find out about all these Ban the Bible bills. And ladies and gentlemen, our donate button is there at pointofview.net. Take advantage of that. We'll be back.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. They're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. We have two fantastic guests on the program today. I'm looking forward to the interviews because both of them are friends of mine and great friends of Point of View. In the second hour, Carmen Pate will join me. Carmen served as co-host of Point of View for 5 years, and she is an author, speaker. Since she left Point of View, she has really gone through it, and she's written a book about the suffering that she's experienced. It's called In Our Weakness, God is Strong. It gives testimony of God's power in her life, especially through her 3-year battle with leukemia, and she will join me today. She's a great friend. And then in this hour, I'm looking forward to talking about socialism, because it's really getting some serious discussion among presidential candidates, among millennials, and in the media. And, you know, I've been collecting some articles about it. For instance, one issue of the Wall Street Journal, there was a Future View article where all kinds of students weighed in on socialism, and it was pretty scary and disturbing. We posted that at pointofview.net. Also, last Friday, we discussed Michael Barone's townhall.com piece, Democrats are getting out on a dangerously left-wing limb. And then Ben Shapiro wrote about Venezuela and the myth of the kinder, gentler socialism. And Peggy Noonan, again in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago, Republicans need to save capitalism because Democrats aren't going to do it. And then the New York Post, just today, socialism is, well, actually, millennial fans don't even know what it is. We're going to talk about what it is and what should Christians think about it. Frank Wright is my guest, and he has served for 34 years in ministry and also professional leadership. He was president and he is president and CEO of D. James Kennedy Ministries. He has also served as president and COO at Salem Media Group, and also president for about 10 years, I think, at the National Religious Broadcasters. And he has been appearing as a guest on Point of View probably for 20 years now. I know that I've interviewed him several times. And Dr. Kennedy, thank you for being with me.
Well, Penna, it's great to be with you. I think I must have been just a wee lad in short pants when I did that first interview.
Me too. I was a little girl in pigtails.
Yes, and it seems like the issues haven't changed much over time, have they?
Well, sadly, you know, one would think that socialism would not be getting the cachet that it is right now because, I mean, we've had the fall of the Berlin Wall. We've had the Soviet Union destroyed. We've had a lot of prosperity under capitalism. And, you know, when we institute tax cuts and things like that, we see our economy booming. So why are we talking about socialism?
Yeah, I've pondered that myself. I mean, if you look empirically at socialism, it's failed everywhere it's tried, bar none, not a single exception. And yet, every generation seems to bring forth a new collection of people that are attracted to it. And I quite frankly think it's because of our brokenness, of our sinful nature, that the new generation that knows nothing about the history hears the great free things I'm going to get under socialism, and they want that. It's coveting, what doesn't belong to you. It's just the brokenness in our human nature that wants us to desire to get these things that sound so enticing until you figure out what's really going on. So it comes back again and again simply because when people aren't acquainted with the history of it and the empirical failure of it, it's a little like that vampire that keeps rising from the grave over and over again.
Well, we could make arguments, and we do often on Point of View, about how much this will cost and how much freedom that we'll lose with all of these proposals that are being made right now, and various presidential candidates are kind of choosing their favorite socialist program to run on. But I think it's important, and this is something that I don't know that we've done, and I'm so glad you're here to do this, is to talk to the Christian conservative and the believer out there who may be attracted to it because they see it as compassionate to the underprivileged, or they see verses in the Bible or passages and stories that seem to advocate that socialism, socialist policies, taking from people who work to earn and giving to those who perhaps can't or don't work, and all of that. So they're attracted to it because of these things, or they're a little bit confused because they hear mixed messages. So you have kind of set out to make that clear in a very, very concise way, haven't you?
Well, what you're describing is not just in the political dialogue. You're hearing people that I would call on the religious left or the evangelical left that are also basically arguing straight up for socialism as a better approach than the biblical approach. And so we've created a whole series of what we call Truth in Action Q&A booklets, question and answer booklets. And the first one we did was, does the Bible teach socialism? That ought to be the starting place for us as believers, right? When we hear about something, whether it's a political philosophy or anything else for that matter, the first question is, how does it line up with the principles and examples we find in the Word of God? So we've created this booklet, I should say. It's a sort of a handheld apologetic, very brief, but it takes all of the arguments and boils them down to the essentials. It argues both sides of the question and then looks to the scriptures to find the answer. And then at the end of the booklet, you get some talking points that you can use to explain to people what is the biblical view about this great question. And of course, Penna, you start off right out of the gate as a Christian looking for an answer to that question. What does the Bible say about socialism? And you run up against a stone wall in the form of God's moral law, summarized in the Ten Commandments. And, we know there are two tables to the commandments. The first 5 commandments are our obligations to God, and the second 5 to mankind. But in the second table of the commandments, you get a clear answer to this question in the 8th commandment: thou shalt not steal. What does that mean? It means you shouldn't steal what belongs to someone else, establishing clearly the right to private property. You see it again in the 10th commandment: don't covet what belongs to your neighbor. So the Bible establishes private property for a lot of important reasons, not the least of which so that we can fulfill our stewardship obligations before God. But right there, socialism fails as a biblical concept because it argues that no one should have a right, in its extreme form, communism, that no one should have a right to private property, that everything should be held in common, that from each according to his ability, each according to his need, and all those kinds of things. So the God-ordained right of private property makes socialism an unbiblical idea from the very get-go.
Let me mention we're about to hit a break here, and during the break, you might want to check out this booklet. It's very easy to get a free copy by going to pointofview.net. There's a prominent banner on our homepage, and you can get a hold of this booklet from D. James Kennedy Ministries, Does the Bible Teach Socialism? Check it out during the break, and we will continue to discuss the issue of socialism. What does the Bible say about it? Does the Bible teach socialism? We'll talk about it right after this. Stay with us.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Will Orthodox Bible-believing Christians find it harder and harder to buy and sell in America? If you asked that question a few decades ago, people would think you lost all rationality. But that is a question Rod Dreyer rightly asked in a recent editorial. He points to the decision by Vanco Payment Solutions to cut off services to a Christian ministry because it is listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate map. The Ruth Center is a Catholic nonprofit located in Louisiana, flagged because the service company believed it promoted hate, violence, harassment, and/or abuse. Now, you can go to the ministry's website and see that it does not even come close to promoting anything like that. People in the ministry believe what the Roman Catholic Church teaches about homosexuality. And because they support traditional marriage and biblical sexuality, the Southern Poverty Law Center tagged them as a hate group. The Washington Free Beacon has been looking into the Southern Poverty Law Center and found that it has become a fundraising powerhouse by expanding its list of domestic hate groups. It recorded more than $50 million in contributions and $328 million in net assets. The group also has financial interest in the Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, and Bermuda. An article in Politico says that you might imagine that the Southern Poverty Law Center has a handful of scrappy lawyers in a dingy office suite somewhere. In fact, it boasts 250 staffers and offices in 4 states, and its main office is the most architecturally striking structure in downtown Montgomery. At one time, the Southern Poverty Law Center provided a necessary function of identifying true hate groups. Today, it slaps the label indiscriminately on ministries and organizations like the Ruth Center that do not deserve it. This, in turn, makes them a target, and they lose vital services. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. My guest is Dr. James, it's from the D. James Kennedy Center, but it's Dr. Frank Wright, and we're talking socialism and what should Christians think about it. Here's some of the proposals for America with regard to socialism: a guaranteed jobs program, Medicare for all, which would abolish, in some of the proposals, private insurance, a guaranteed living wage, the Green New Deal, subsidies for childcare, and free tuition at colleges and universities. Of course, not to mention the fact that all of these would bankrupt the country or the individuals who are having to pay taxes. This is the whole idea of stealing. But really the freedom that is lost with regard to these is something else we ought to be concerned about. But Dr. Wright is focusing in on what the Bible says about socialism and what it does not say. And I think that's the important piece to this, Frank, and that is that we've got socialist evangelicals across our country that they've been around for a while. Some of them are aging. And they've been talking about these ideas for a long time. Why is this gaining so much influence and consideration from people now when we've got such a booming economy?
Well, I think part of it, Penna, is that this is rising at a time when the socialist left wing of the Christian community, if you want to call them that, have long ignored the scriptures. And so those who are well-versed in scriptures can counter those arguments easily. But sadly, we're living in a time when our churches and the average person member of a church may not be as well versed in these things either. So you've got the dual problem of people not knowing their scriptures, and the second problem of people with big microphones, platforms, and voices ignoring them outright because it suits their theology. You know, the second place, by the way, in Scripture that I think we need to focus on after looking at the Ten Commandments and the commandments against stealing and coveting, you know, those commandments apply to governments as well as individuals, right? It's not suddenly virtuous when a government steals and redistributes the money any more so than it is an individual. But the second place to look to get a biblical answer for a Christian is, what does the call of God look like in the life of a devoted follower of Christ? In the early chapters of Genesis, we read what's called by most theologians the cultural mandate, in which God delegates to mankind dominion over the earth. You know, Genesis 1:28, subdue the earth, have dominion over it. We would say, by extension, bring all things into captivity for Christ. That command requires accountability before God, which means that it's a stewardship responsibility. So how can I be accountable for a stewardship responsibility if there's not private property? So here we see it not just in the moral law of God, we see it in our call of God. And then in the New Testament, you remember this story where the fellow walks up to Jesus and says, "What's the greatest commandment?" And Jesus says, "Love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself." So caring for the widow, the orphan, the poor is a personal responsibility for us, not a government responsibility. Giving to the Lord's work is also a personal calling to love, and loving your neighbor as yourself. All of these things, to fulfill these commands to be a disciple of Christ, require the ownership of personal property. So socialism doesn't just do bad things and it's an uneconomical idea. For the Christian, it violates your conscience and your calling before God to do what Jesus has commanded us to do. So socialism, you know, poses all kinds of difficulties. And then you referred earlier, Penna, to the book of Acts, and Acts chapter 5. There's a passage there that, I mean, still widely cited today by the evangelical left as the Scriptures not only condoning but mandating socialism. And that's the account of Ananias and Sapphira, where they sold, where the Scripture says that the people at that time in Jerusalem were holding all things in common together. They were under great persecution, we remember from the book of Acts, and they were holding all things in common. And then the story is about Ananias and Sapphira, who sold a piece of property but withheld a portion of the proceeds back, and their lives were forfeited because of that. All of this says, see, they were greedy and they held on to their property, and for that reason, you know, God killed them, and they should have given that to Peter and should have supported socialism in that regard. The problem with this is, again, people not knowing their scriptures. In the very early part of that passage, Peter says to Ananias, wasn't this property yours while it remained unsold? Did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it still not at your disposal? In other words, Peter never argued the property belonged to the church. It was the lying about it that cost them their lives. It says they lied to the Holy Spirit. Here's the thing, Penna, and let's boil it down to three simple things. The difference between what people call socialism in the church and the socialism that's argued in the public square is, like as Mark Twain said, it's the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. They have nothing in common whatsoever. The so-called socialism we see in Acts is voluntary, not coerced. Mm-hmm. And secondly, they bring their property to the church to distribute, not to the government. And thirdly, it just didn't work there either. Paul went all through his New Testament voyages and missionary journeys taking collections for the church at Jerusalem, because socialism didn't work there either. So socialism is not under true socialism, political socialism, it's not voluntary. There's a gun held to your head. And the money's not taken in and distributed by the church. It's taken in by the bureaucracy, which consumes a huge portion of it before anything is distributed. And so what you get is a leveling of the playing field, as socialists say, but it's a leveling at the poverty level.
Well, it's an important distinction, because the left will say to the church and critique the church, you are not acting, quote unquote, Christianly, because you are not obeying these scriptural admonitions to care for the poor. But the Bible doesn't speak to countries. The Bible speaks to people, correct?
Correct. And if you want to know what the duties of government are, go to Romans chapter 13, and you'll find what the responsibilities of civil government are, and it's not caring for the poor. That is a personal responsibility. Now, granted, the church is not doing a very good job of that in our day. The church has, in many respects, defaulted to the massive growth of government and doesn't do what it used to do in taking care of the poor. That doesn't change things, though. That just means we've let the government grow so big that so much of our taxes are consumed that we don't have enough money to take care of the poor ourselves. Listen, when Thomas Sowell studied Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty in his book, The Vision of the Anointed, back in the 1990s, he said that if you looked at it objectively, poverty was falling like a stone after World War II. The post-World War II prosperity, the rates of poverty were falling rapidly as economic growth returned to the Western world. And he said right in the middle of that falling level of poverty, Lyndon Johnson declared his war on poverty. And then 20 years later, more than 20 years later, Sowell looked at that. He said you could literally have taken that money spent in the war on poverty, and you could have written a check for $70,000 to every poor person in America each year for 20 years for the money that was spent on the so-called war on poverty. And that's because when government does anything, it metastasizes into this inefficient and corrupt bureaucracy. And so that's the second reason, beyond the biblical one, why socialism doesn't work. It's a creator of poverty, not an eliminator of poverty.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's open up the phones, 800-351-1212. If you have a question or comment for Dr. Frank Wright, we would love to hear from you. Again, it's 800-351-1212. I want to point you to pointofview.net to click through to get this resource. Does the Bible teach socialism? The thing I like about it is that it's simple. It's very easy to understand. And we are getting bombarded with questions right now from people, especially, I think, in the millennial generation. We'll talk about this after the break, who are taught in their universities and other schools that this is it's really the only direction our country should be going. And they don't even get they don't get the other side. So this gives the other side in an easily understandable sort of set of arguments and talking points that you could practically memorize if you read it a couple of times, and it will really help you in these conversations as we head up into some of these debates in the country. So go to pointofview.net during the break and check it out. We'll be back.
From Thinking Man Films and Fathom Events comes Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. A new documentary follows investigative filmmaker Timothy Mahoney's faith-affirming journey throughout the Middle East in search of scientific evidence that Moses wrote the first books of the Bible.
The Lord said to Moses, write this in a book.
Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. In theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only. More information is available at patternsofevidence.com/Moses.
Is there a lot of free time in your schedule? Probably not. Most of us are on the go all the time, and Point of View is ready to go with you no matter where on the go is. Visit the App Store for your phone or tablet and search for Point of View Radio. Our app lets you listen or watch anytime it's convenient for you. And since we're told to be doers, not just listeners, the app provides a quick way to take action on the issues we're talking about. You can send us a question, find a local radio station, read articles, listen and share Kirby's Viewpoints commentaries. It's a lot of impact in one little free app. Visit the App Store today, right now, and download the Point of View Radio app. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And my guest is Dr. Frank Wright. He is president and CEO at D. James Kennedy Ministries. And one of the reasons we have to talk about the issue of socialism and educate believers, Frank, is because sometimes the church has been failing to do this. And I know that D. James Kennedy did this when he was alive, and you're continuing that legacy at D. James Kennedy Ministries, aren't you?
Well, that's true, Penna. You know, there's a mistake that's made. It's a fundamental mistake of biblical worldview, and if you don't start in the right place, you end up in the wrong place. The starting point for all biblical worldview is that God is sovereign over his creation, all of it, which means he's sovereign over government and politics and medicine and law and education and business and community service. He's sovereign over all of these things. And so we look to these, people try to limit the church's engagement in the culture by saying the church ought not to be involved in politics. Of course, you and I both know that in our day, everything is political. I mean, NFL football games are political, for crying out loud. So it's a ridiculous canard to say the church ought not to be involved in politics when God is sovereign over all areas of creation. The bigger issue is, how do we view this from a Christian perspective? And that's where the church stumbles a bit, because many pastors are reticent, timid, and I think, quite frankly, unbiblical themselves by not teaching their congregations what the Bible has to say about the great moral, ethical, and cultural questions of our day.
We've got lots of folks who want to weigh in on this. Let's go to the state of Georgia and speak with Amalte.
Mauri.
What's your question?
So basically, my question is, because I was just hearing and I was listening to everything that was going on about Dr. Frank's comments about the government, and I just was wondering then, whose responsibility is it if the government is too large right now and is not, we can't trust it with money? Whose responsibility is it then to do a shift and really put the church back into where it used to be?
Whose responsibility? Did you hear the question, Frank?
Yes,
Amadi, is your question how to do that?
Whose responsibility is it?
Yes.
Well, yeah, sure. Okay, that's fair. A fair question. Biblically, there's no question it's the responsibility of the individual believer as they're found as part of a community in a local church. And there are many of our churches that are doing something. If your church is not doing anything at all in this area of ministering to the widow and orphan and the poor, people in distress, people who are in need of someone to come to their aid for a variety of reasons, then your church is pretty far off the theological teachings of Christ. And the book of James, remember James said, religion that God will accept is ministering to the widows and orphans in their distress. If you're not doing at least that. But the problem is, how do you get back from here? That's a difficult question. Part of it is, if we're going to limit the growth of government, we have to starve government. And so anytime anybody proposes a tax cut, you should be in favor of it, because it'll force a reduction in the size of government. Privatization, those are efforts we should support, because private entities can do these things more efficiently and more effectively than government will. Today, government has become a giant jobs program for the party in power, which for the last 40 years has been, in the bureaucracy at least, has been the liberals. And so we need to accept our responsibility and work for smaller, limited government. We're hopeful that President Trump's appointments of judicial nominees, most of whom are constitutionalists, or what some people call originalists, and are likely to help limit the size of the regulatory bureaucracy that invades so much of our lives. But Amaudi is correct. The responsibility starts with us first.
Dr. Wright, when you look at the free enterprise system, you talk about it being the most biblical one, and this idea of coercion. And so, you know, it's very coercive. And in a sense, the capitalist system takes advantage of our sin nature in that it appeals to people. It doesn't coerce them, but it makes itself serve that person in such a way that they would choose to do business with that particular organization.
Yeah, that's one of the fallacial arguments that are put against the free enterprise system. That is that it creates greed in people. Well, we've already got that
greedy.
in us. Yeah, we're already greedy. We don't need anybody to do any more creating. what it does do, what you're alluding to, Penna, is the free enterprise system channels greed in a way that ends up positive for society. And here's how that works. If I'm a greedy person, my motivations are horrible. I just want to make money. I want to spend it on conspicuous consumption. I want the whole world to think I'm a big shot. I've got no good motivations at all. The only way I'm going to make money under a free enterprise system is if I develop a product or a service or a new innovation that the marketplace wants, and they'll do business with me, and so I make money by providing a valuable service. So my greed gets channeled in a positive direction. Not my personal greed. I'm still, as a person, I'm still struggling with the wrong kind of motivation for life. But the free enterprise system channels that greed in a direction that benefits other people, and that's been the story of elevating from the Industrial Revolution on forward, elevating the lives of people by being forced to go into the free enterprise markets and provide something of value that people actually want. You know, Penna, I think sometimes with our younger audience and people, parents and others who want to try to explain things to a younger audience, they probably really need to start with the building blocks of what socialism actually is. What's the definition of socialism? And it is the ownership or control by government of all of the means of production in society. Now, means of production is an economist term. It means all the assets, all the money, all the factories, everything. The government either owns it or controls it. The government controls the flow of capital. The government decides whether you get to go to college or not. Or if you do, it'll decide where you go. And not only that, it'll decide what studies you do, because the government is operating all of these sectors and needs to fill this one over here, and that's what you're going to study. So the government controls everything, and the thing that disappears is capital. There is no excess capital to be invested in these new ideas. So under socialism, the one word that if the millennial generation could just get their arms around this, the one thing you will never find under a socialist government is innovation, because there's no money and no freedom to develop new things. So here's the thing, and by the way, there's no motivation either, simply because your assets are going to be limited. You're not going to be allowed to earn any more than the other person. So here's the thing: under socialism, no Apple, no Google, no Facebook, no Amazon, no Twitter. Nothing of an innovative nature. Look at all of the medical devices that have come into being in the last 50 years. None of that. No innovation. Under socialism, you get Venezuela. You get Cuba. And I've been to Cuba. I went to Cuba back in 12 or 13 years ago, back before it had begun to open back up. I went on a Treasury Department license to do humanitarian work. And I found a nation on the edge of a third world country. Socialism is devastating, and none of the things that young people think they'll get out of it will they actually get. In fact, I'm convinced from the young people that I've talked to is they think that this idea of leveling is fine, but in their imagination, they think it's leveled about where they are right now, at a very high level of income. Well, as Margaret Thatcher once said, the problem with socialism is sooner or later you run out of other people's money to spend, and when you do, that lowers everybody down to the bare subsistence level, and that's why they're eating horse meat in Venezuela if there are any horses left today.
Capitalism creates the wealth, but socialism spends that, what capitalism is creating. And, as you said, in Venezuela, we ought to be looking at this right now, but I think what some of the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes of the world are saying is that we can do this better. It wouldn't happen that way here in the United States, and it's more like Sweden. But Sweden has a lot of capitalist facets to its economy, and just a big welfare state. Ladies and gentlemen, we're taking your calls, 800-351-1212. Well, we've got a lot of them, and we will try to get to you. Dr. Wright will answer your questions, but during the break, again, I want to encourage you to go and check out this book. a booklet, Does the Bible Teach Socialism? It's really a great set of arguments to basically show you what the Bible says about socialism and that it does not advocate socialism. Some people are going to tell you it does, and you want to be ready with the arguments. This is a great opportunity to get a hold of this. You can do it by going to pointofview.net, and we'll be back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Donna Dunbar and her husband Clarence love to serve their community in Port Charlotte, Florida. They founded a soup kitchen at which they donated over 4,000 volunteer service hours, an act that won them the President's Volunteer Service Award. But things aren't as rosy at their condominium. Donna is a lay minister in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. She welcomes a few of her friends to the social room at her condo each week for a Bible study. The room is used by lots of people. Some play games there. There's a weekly poker game and even a regular movie night for all to attend. Until recently, Donna's Bible study was no big deal. But without any announcement or warning, the Condo Association Board adopted a resolution putting an end to the use of the common areas of the condo for religious purposes, including Donna's Bible study. Someone even put a sign on the organ in the room that said, "Any and all Christian music is banned." First Liberty Institute filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development alleging that Donna's condo broke the law with such a discriminatory policy and asking Secretary Ben Carson to undertake an investigation into the matter. After all, such unequal treatment of citizens shows hostility to religion and violates federal law and the First Amendment. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, and my guest is Dr. Frank Wright. And, you know, Frank, when I was a little girl, my parents sort of catechized me in capitalism. They taught me, especially when elections would come around, the difference between communism and capitalism. We weren't believers. We went to church, but I wouldn't say we knew the Lord. We didn't really read the Bible regularly as a family, but he taught me just the principles of free markets and just economic conservatism, basically. And I don't know that parents know how to do that these days, and certainly schools don't do it. And universities definitely don't do it. So we need some help here. And that's, I think, what your booklet provides for Christians.
Penny, your friends and your acquaintances in that description you just gave are not alone. I teach, our studios here at D. James Kennedy Ministries are on the campus of the Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I teach in the adult Sunday school, and I teach a class on the biblical basis for economics. And the lack of understanding is deep. It's appalling in some respects, and it's because we haven't done what your parents did, and that is assumed that we're going to face these things later in life and prepared us for them a little bit. My wife's side of the family came from Europe after World War II, and so in fact, they were in the Russian sector when the Russians came sweeping to the west, and they were German by descent, and so Germans and the Russians have never gotten along all that well. They had a very, very difficult time under communism in Poland. And so they came here catechizing their children and their grandchildren on the free enterprise system, just as you described, and that's very needed in our day.
Let's go to the phones. Go ahead, and we'll take a call in a minute.
Okay, before we let this go, because you made reference to this, or a caller did, and Bernie Sanders uses it all the time. It's this Norwegian example of socialism.
Right.
Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Ocasio-Cortez says, I'm talking about something more like that, not like Venezuela. People need to understand a little bit better what's actually going on there in the North Sea. First of all, Norway, for example, is not a socialist economy. You could only call it partially socialist in that the government does own, has nationalized and owns certain industries, but it's not. It's really a very high-tax welfare state. But it's also a country that gets a huge percentage of its revenue from the North Sea oil platforms which it owns. And there's a curiosity that young people ought to understand about all the Norwegian nations. Guess who pays for the national defense of Norway? We do here in America through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in which we're the biggest contributor. So if you're a nation like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, you got oil sea revenue, you're a very high-tax state to start with. You don't have to pay for your own national defense. Somebody else is doing that for you. Other than that, they're just like a socialist country. So they're a terrible example of what socialism really is. And the truth of the matter is, we interviewed someone for our Truths That Transform television program who studied this. The truth is that in those Norwegian countries, whatever socialist programs they started after World War II, they've largely abandoned them all, because they do this. They have the same thing of, enervating people to where they're not willing to get out and do anything at all and contribute at all to society. And so socialism doesn't work anywhere it's tried, including in the Norwegian countries.
Let's go to California and speak with Jeff. Jeff, thanks for calling in. You're on Point of View.
Hi. Yeah, you just kind of somewhat answered my question. I have friends who said the same thing. They're not looking at Venezuela, but they call it a democratic socialist system, and that's what they call themselves, a democratic socialist, which to me seems at odds with each other. I'm a conservative, but if you could answer that maybe a little bit more, and that's probably part of the problem that we're having with the young people when they use the term democratic socialist versus socialism outright.
Well, Frank, in one sense, you could get people voting for socialism, and that's what we want to avoid, right?
That's exactly the point there. Jeff, you really touched on something. Labels mean everything, and by adding that democratic adjective in front of the socialist platform, it can fool people to think it's something different altogether. It's not really democratic in any way, shape, or form. Socialist governments, every one of them, are controlling. They're top-down, top-driven. They're not of the people, by the people, of the people, for the people, like our system is. So the idea of a democratic socialism is bordering on oxymoronic, but it's on its face, it's just really not true. Socialist governments will brook no other authority except their own. They will not allow the families to exercise authority over their children. They will not allow the church to exercise authority in competition with the government, which is what people say. Basically, if you're really a committed socialist, what you say about why socialism's failed so spectacularly is, well, we should have destroyed the family and the church first, then it would have succeeded. Well, when they make that kind of a statement, that tells you what they really are from the starting place. They're not a democratic institution or ideal. They're totalitarian, which is what you saw in Venezuela. By the way, Hugo Chavez, when he rose to power in Venezuela, he quoted the Bible every other day, particularly Acts chapter 5 that we talked out earlier about how the Bible teaches socialism. And look at what, God hath wrought in Venezuela.
Wow. Frank, 10 years ago, the very term socialism actually would turn voters away. And, since we just talked a little bit about this idea of democratic socialism, I mean, what's your prognosis on this? Do you think the American people are that gullible, even though they've been indoctrinated, to actually embrace some of these policies in our upcoming elections?
Penna, you and Point of View have a better informed audience than most because of the high quality of the work that you do there, but I'm afraid that there aren't as many thinking people. I talked to a guy recently about Hollywood, and he said Hollywood is a giant echo chamber in which the people there aren't really leftists by conviction. That's just all they hear around them, and so they just sort of imbibe what they know they need to believe or say to go along and get along kind of thing. Well, the whole culture is a giant echo chamber in our day, and so people aren't really thinking these things through. They're hearing people that they like say them, or friends. The ideals sound appealing. And so you've got people embracing things not based on rational thought, but really based on more of kind of a cultural osmosis. I think part of the challenge here is a labeling challenge. Jeff mentioned the idea of democratic socialist and how misleading that is. The left has done a pretty good job of demonizing the term capitalism. And interestingly, polls of millennials, when you substitute a different word for capitalism, you get a different outcome. About 2/3 of millennials say they're against capitalism. But if you substitute the words free enterprise system, the numbers flip in the exact opposite direction. So in some respects, this giant echo chamber that has successfully demonized the word capitalism, oh, you're one of those capitalist pigs, or that they used to say back in the 1970s. They've been successful with that. We need to use different terminology that works better.
I guess we do.
We need to call it the free enterprise system.
Frank Wright, thank you so much for joining me today and informing our listeners. And I appreciate what you're doing there, and I look forward to all the booklets in this series. But, ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage you now, as we leave this segment, to go to pointofview.net, get a hold of this booklet, Does the Bible Teach Socialism? It's going to inform you, and it's going to help you to convince others of the wisdom of our system and that we don't want to destroy it. Next up, Carmen Pate will be back.
Great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
We are so glad you're listening and you're with us for Point of View. And some of our listeners are very loyal to this program. Some are so loyal that they may have actually been regular listeners when my next guest was co-host here. She is Carmen Pate, and she is an author and a speaker. She teaches biblical studies, and she's a mentor. And I first knew Carmen when she took over the job as president of Concerned Women for America. I was a volunteer there. And she did a great job there at CWA. She's also produced and hosted nationally syndicated radio programs, including Truth That Transforms Radio, in addition to Point of View. And she, after leaving sort of that field, she has suffered greatly, and we're going to talk about that here on the program. And she's written a book about her 3-year battle with leukemia called In Our Weakness, God is Strong. I read the book over the weekend, and I'm so grateful that my guest is Carmen Pate. Carmen, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much, Penna. I so look forward to our time together.
Well, so do I, especially after reading your book, because, of course, I had known about your struggles and your illness, and I follow you on Facebook, so I've seen all the scriptures and prayers that you share with people. I knew that you were going through this trial victoriously, but to read your book over this weekend was so encouraging to me, and I'm sure that's why you wrote it, so that you could encourage people, didn't you?
Well, you know, it's amazing. I think of all the ministry opportunities that the Lord has allowed me to be involved in over the years, Penna. I never expected the most important one would be in the hospital when I was suffering, truly dying with leukemia.
Yeah, I'm sure you didn't expect that. I mean, we had some fun times here at Point of View because you were here as co-host, and sometimes I got to come in and work with you. And, you know, one of the things that I always noticed about you, Carmen, was that sometimes we would have people on the program that were experts in health, nutrition, and how to eat and exercise and all of that. And you were very diligent in choosing the things that made sense to you and actually doing them. So you've always been a person who's taken really good care of yourself, haven't you?
Well, I've always tried to do that, and my husband as well. We've always been conscious about eating right and exercising, all those things, Penna. But you know what I've learned, Penna, is that so much today of our health issues is environmentally caused, and just a lot of things that are in what we eat and in the air and in the water, everything, I think works together sometimes against us. Cancer, you know, it's a fallen world, Penna, and cancer is one of the hardships that we face in this fallen world. And so it's not anything rare these days, sadly. I think 1 in 4 people experience some form of cancer in their lives. And so it's a huge issue, not only for the ones who are going through the battle of cancer, but their families, Penna, the caretakers, they suffer as well. And I think sometimes we overlook that fact.
Well, you know, it did befall you in your life, Carmen, and I think the message that comes through loud and clear in your book is that you have made a choice with regard to this, and I think it's a choice that your book encourages a lot of people to make, and that is, well, how do I deal with this? Do I start and plan a pity party? Do I complain to everyone I meet about this? Do I ask God and sort of battle with him, why me? But instead, what you've chosen to do is to look for people who are suffering with you or in a similar fashion or maybe a different fashion and try to figure out how you can minister to them. So you've taken what you've gone through and you've used it to minister to others. And I think your life is the message.
Well, I pray so. And I find, we all suffer, Penna. Everyone has some sort of suffering in their lives, whether it be health or finances or marriages, whatever it might be. But what I find is that we can go into a pity party. We can go into even depression if we focus on our circumstances. But if we take our focus off those circumstances, it seems to lift us up. It almost seems to be therapeutic. And so what the Lord really laid on my heart in the hospital was take your mind off of your pain, your suffering, what you're going through, and just open your eyes to the pain that's around you. And Penna, when I did that, I was overwhelmed. I realized, every single person in the hospital was fighting for their life. Cancer is not a light suffering. It is a battle. And I realized not only were they suffering, their families were there. They were suffering. The nurses and the doctors that were taking care of us, they had issues in their own lives where they were suffering. And so the Lord really helped me to see the pain that was around me. And yes, there was something I could do. I could say an encouraging word. I could smile. I could share what the Lord had laid on my heart for the day in the Word, or say, could I pray with you? And I've never had anyone say, no, I don't want you to pray for me.
Never?
I think in that situation, no. In that situation, it's like people are looking for someone to pray with them. And that was even people that were not necessarily, active believers. Maybe they didn't even go to church. But if I said, well, can I pray with you? They would say, please do. Please do. And they would thank me afterward. And I would just say, thank you, Lord. Thank you for letting me see that it's not a matter of people going to reject you or get angry with you. No, they welcome those prayers, Penna.
Carmen Pate is my guest, and as I mentioned earlier, she has served in many capacities, ministry, pro-life, in the political arena through Concerned Women for America and other groups, and certainly here as co-host of Point of View. So she's aware of what's going on in the culture, but she's, I think, become aware through different things that God has brought into her lives, what is going on in people's hearts and lives and their spirits. And so we're going to continue this hour with Carmen. I'm so grateful, Carmen, that you're with me and that you're doing this. I guess one of the questions I'll ask you after the break is, was there a time when you made a conscious decision that you were going to use your cancer to share God's love with others? Because I think, maybe that just happened, but I have a feeling, knowing you and knowing what I know about you, that it was probably a conscious decision. So we will talk about that after the break. And I want to point you, though, to pointofview.net. You can find out more about Carmen, and her extensive bio is there, her picture. And as I mentioned, she's gone through cancer actually twice. And so you'll see her beautiful picture there at pointofview.net. And then stay with us, because we're going to continue our conversation with Carmen Pate here on Point of View. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Will Orthodox Bible-believing Christians find it harder and harder to buy and sell in America? If you asked that question a few decades ago, people would think you lost all rationality. But that is a question Rod Dreyer rightly asked in a recent editorial. He points to the decision by Vanco Payment Solutions to cut off services to a Christian ministry because it is listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate map. The Ruth Center is a Catholic nonprofit located in Louisiana, flagged because the service company believed it promoted hate, violence, harassment, and/or abuse. Now, you can go to the ministry's website and see that it does not even come close to promoting anything like that. People in the ministry believe what the Roman Catholic Church teaches about homosexuality. And because they support traditional marriage and biblical sexuality, the Southern Poverty Law Center tagged them as a hate group. The Washington Free Beacon has been looking into the Southern Poverty Law Center and found that it has become a fundraising powerhouse by expanding its list of domestic hate groups. It recorded more than $50 million in contributions and $328 million in net assets. The group also has financial interest in the Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, and Bermuda. An article in Politico says that you might imagine that the Southern Poverty Law Center as a handful of scrappy lawyers in a dingy office suite somewhere. In fact, it boasts 250 staffers and offices in 4 states, and its main office is the most architecturally striking structure in downtown Montgomery. At one time, the Southern Poverty Law Center provided a necessary function of identifying true hate groups. Today, it slaps the label indiscriminately on ministries and organizations like the Ruth Center that do not deserve it. This, in turn, makes them a target, and they lose vital services. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. My guest is Carmen Pate, and among many accomplishments, Carmen was co-host of Point of View during some crucial years here. And after leaving, she went on to some other broadcast ministries and other ministries. And during that time, she also had cancer twice, first melanoma and then leukemia. And Carmen, I'm so grateful, first of all, that you're willing to tell the story and that you've written the book to do so. And before we just go any further, can you tell, I know the book is not out yet, but it's out soon, isn't it?
Well, actually, yes. It can be ordered through Amazon. They're doing pre-orders right now for both the book and ebook. And I think it's like March 22nd delivery right now, Penna. So that is
so very soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you gave me the privilege of reading an early copy, and I'm so glad you did. But tell us about actually what happened. I mean, you were diagnosed with melanoma, and that's bad enough. And you dealt with it, and you were in remission, and then to come back and get another cancer. I mean, it's like, really? Did you ask God why?
Yes, of course. And I think that's one of the things that's so important. I mean, we're all human. I mean, our flesh, it's like, Lord, why me? Why? I've already done this cancer thing. I don't want another dose of it. Again, like I said earlier, it is a fallen world. So cancer just comes, and it's selective. I think it's very random. But the Lord uses it for our.
I think we may have lost Carmen, so we need to try to get her back. That line went away. Again, my guest is Carmen Pate. One of the endorsements of the book was from Del Tackett, and he used to be at Focus on the Family, and then he was with, I think, Truth That Transforms, and now he's with Summit Ministries. He's done a lot over the years in his career to teach a Christian worldview. But he endorsed this book, and he said what she had done, what Carmen had done through her suffering, is, exemplary, of course. And he said, in suffering, one can flourish and help others to flourish. And so, if you encounter suffering in your life, which we all do at some point, we can look at it two ways. And what I've seen is a realistic reaction to cancer, which Carmen just described, but also, and I think we have Carmen back now. Carmen, I was just talking about Del Tackett's endorsement of your book, and he said, in suffering, one can flourish and help others to flourish. So even though you had human reactions and questions for God, you still chose a certain path that helped others. You chose to focus on others.
Yes. And, Penna, my husband Bob and I, we've had many trials in our lives, just like every other couple or every other person. And we chose a long time ago that when these trials come, because they will continue to come till the Lord takes us home, that we would choose to see it as an adventure with God, an adventure that was all about His purposes in it. It really wasn't about us. And so when we rest in His purposes and look for the opportunities that He gives us to reflect Him to others, to encourage others, to point them to Him, that's where the real joy comes in suffering. It's hard for people to see joy in suffering, but the scriptures tell us, rejoice in our troubles. And so when you look at them as an adventure with the Lord and an opportunity to influence others for Him, it truly can be joyful. And so when I was diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia in 2015, that was huge for us. That was a big deal for us. And we thought that was the ultimate test. But then a year later, I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which required a bone marrow transplant, a whole different experience in itself. So we don't know the magnitude of the trials that will come, but by God's grace, we can still see the blessing and joy in them, Penna.
So you mentioned the bone marrow transplant, and I know, you also mentioned the cancer is just everywhere, and there are probably every listener knows someone who has had or has cancer or has had it themselves. So there are a lot of people that can relate to different parts of this, although I think that going through a bone marrow transplant, it's a life-changing experience, isn't it? I mean, it really alters your life.
It does. And the side effects can last up to 3 years following the transplant. Well, my transplant was in February of 2017. So I can very well experience those side effects for even another year, which will be our third year. And I do see them. I have the bone marrow now of a 28-year-old male. And it's incredible the changes that take place in your body. Now, I am still totally female. Thank you. I just pray for that. But there are changes taking place that I recognize are new to me as a person. And so, so there are a lot of adjustments that go with that, where they're still learning about the side effects. I had hoped to be in studio with you today, and I'm not, simply because of another side effect. And so I anticipate those happening from time to time, but they pass, and so we're getting through this. I'm very, very grateful.
I'm grateful also. So after you, was it like the cancer switched to the acute form of leukemia, or was it a different cancer?
Yes, it switched, and that is unusual. Normally, it will not switch from chronic to acute, but mine did. and very quickly. And, after I had the transplant, I was in remission for a few months, which was wonderful news for us. So there were a few months of really normal life for us. And then I relapsed, Penna, in May of 2018. And that required a 40-day hospital stay. And that is where the ministry was given to me. When I was in the hospital prior, I had prayed for others and encouraged others, but I was more intentional. And I think in part because, quite honestly, Penna, I thought I was dying. I was not given a lot of hope, and I thought, well, I want to finish well. And if I have to finish in the hospital, then I want to be intentional about loving people and pointing them to my Savior. And so I began journaling every day, my interactions with others, and it became just a wonderful opportunity for prayer warriors to join in with me, to pray for me, but also to pray for the people that I was ministering to. So probably, Penna, it was one of the most beautiful ministries the Lord has ever given me.
Well, it is beautiful, and it's in the book, and I love the way this book is laid out, Carmen, because, there's just the story, the chronicling of your journey, and then there are the actual prayers and stories of these people that you encountered, and so, and I've been a prayer partner with you. I've prayed for, noticing things on Facebook and praying with you and seeing what was going on, and so you've enveloped others into your ministry in this way, and that's wonderful that we have social media that we're able to do that. So that's the other part, and then you have the reflections also. So this book of yours is so readable. I mean, it's really to go through it. You can read every part or just the prayers, and you can still get a lot of good spiritual wisdom, whatever you choose to do. I just chose to read the whole thing, and it was very, very well done. So first of all, I want to recommend that people order the book. But also, one of the things that really struck me as I read about all the people and the other patients and the healthcare workers that you got to minister to is that we need to be ready to explain our faith and articulate it, the reason for the hope within us. And, you are ready because that's you. You study the Bible. But it's an encouragement to others to do the same.
Oh, I pray so. I in my room, in the hospital room, of course I had my Bible, and I had some devotionals, and I had Christian music playing all the time, and I had scriptures posted on the walls. I surrounded myself with God's truth because the enemy loves to lie to you in those times. So it was a wonderful encouragement each day.
Carmen Pate is my guest. We will continue with her story right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And on the line with me is Carmen Pate. And as I've mentioned, Carmen, among many other ministries she's had in her life, was co-host of Point of View for about 5 years. And I know that she is great at interacting with callers. So let's open the phones at 800-351-1212. And, of course, Carmen's book is about her cancer journey and how she allowed God to use her through it. Although it doesn't, it's not in a bragging way that she tells this story. I love how she does it. It's really with humility. But the book is In Our Weakness, God is Strong. And so we will open up the phones and take your calls, 800-351-1212. Carmen, you are a very accomplished person, and I know that you're pretty independent. You and your husband, Bob, have both had responsible jobs. You both travel, and you really take care of things, and you kind of nail down your life in a sense, and do a lot, and probably for most of your life haven't needed a whole lot of people to do things for you, but that changes drastically when you have cancer, doesn't it?
Oh, it so does, Penna. You know, it's a pride issue, actually. You feel like you don't need anyone to help you. But with cancer, particularly with the leukemia that I had, there were times, Penna, I could do nothing for myself. I couldn't shop. I couldn't clean a house. I couldn't do anything. And Bob was wonderful to be such a great caretaker for me. But it also involved me asking friends to help because Bob travels a lot in his work. And Penna, that was so hard for me. It was so hard for me. And the Lord really convicted me that Carmen, that's pride. That is pride. People want to use their gifts and talents to bless others. And for you to say no is truly a pride issue. And so I accepted that and asked the Lord's forgiveness and began to accept help. And what a blessing. What a blessing. And there were so many who were so willing to, take me to chemotherapy or to take me to get my medications or come to the house and cook or to clean or just to help. And it is an incredible thing that the body of Christ, Penna, does when they're really reaching out to their brothers and sisters in Christ to when they're, the scripture says when they're rejoicing to rejoice with them, when they're weeping, weep with them. And so to be able to experience that was a blessing for me. But I also learned, Penna, that people are blessed to do those things for others, and you really want to bless them in that way.
Well, they see someone suffering, and they just, it's sort of our natural reaction to want to do something. So if you allow that, you're actually helping them.
Yes, isn't it true? Just was a real blessing to both Bob and me.
All right, talking about pride, which we all struggle with, you always have looked so beautiful, and you still do. I see the pictures of you when, you've gone through the treatments and things. But, and so, though you had to be packed in ice sometimes to deal with fevers, you had to wear that gown that's so beautiful. You had to walk around with IV poles and hanging off of you. So this is a whole different way of presenting yourself fashion-wise, isn't it?
Well, all of that kind of gets thrown out the window when you're fighting for your life. And I've lost my hair twice. Right now, I don't have very much hair, but it's coming back. So you do go through a lot of changes, and you realize so much of your life is just vanity. Mm-hmm. And being able to set those things aside and go, you know what, it truly is your heart that matters. It really is. You learn in those days when you're in the hospital for a long period of time, you learn to laugh at things that maybe others would not see as funny. But yeah, you learn to laugh about your IV pole that you haul around the hospital halls, and some of the patients even name them Penna because you're attached to them 24/7. So yeah, a parent kind of goes out the door.
There are a lot of folks that understand these things that you're talking about because they've been through it themselves, or their family members have. And one of the other areas of cancer that I think, and really this has to do with a lot of medical problems that we have, but I think cancer is probably one of the, most difficult examples of this, and that is waiting. A lot of times you just have to wait for things, don't you?
Oh, you do. And I think it's one of the most difficult things about cancer. And, Penna, even when you're in remission for years, every time you go for blood work, for some it's every 3 months or every, 6 months, or how, depending on how well they've done, but you still have to go. The rest of your life, you have to go ever so often and have blood work done to see if you're still in remission. Because remission doesn't mean healed. Remission means for right now you don't have cancer, but the possibility of returning is always there. So when you are waiting, when it approaches that time for you to go and have your blood work done, you wake up at night. And it's like, just the what if, because cancer is such a disruption to your life, to your routine, to your finances, just to how you feel. So the things that you just enjoy doing, everything changes. So the waiting to hear, am I still in remission? Have I relapsed? Do I have to take more chemo or increase my chemo? All of those things are in the back of your mind. And sadly, it is for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I was thinking, especially when you go through, it doesn't sound like the treatments for the kind of cancer you have, and probably most cancers, were much fun at all. As a matter of fact, you felt really awful during certain times of this. And to be on the other side and be in remission and to be free of that and not have the side effects of the chemo and all of that, and think, okay, I'm done. But you could never really totally say that, can you?
No, you really can't, sadly. And but I tell you the upside of that. You don't take a day for granted.
Yeah.
Penna. You wake up every morning and go, wow, the Lord has given me another day. What can I do for him today? Who can I be a light for today? Because you don't know. None of us know. I say in the book, too, God numbers our days. You don't have to have cancer to think maybe, your time is short. We don't know. So much can happen in this fallen world. So you learn to appreciate every single day that you're given, because you don't know if it's your last. But we should all really have that attitude, Penna. All of us should.
I think of my mother who had cancer in her 50s, and then, she was done with it. She fought it for a couple of years, and it wasn't until 30 years later she got cancer again, a different kind, and that's what took her in her 80s. And, so it makes me realize, well, the Lord will choose some way of taking us home to be with him, to be, out of this world and with the Lord. And it may, for you, even because of all the cancer you've gone through, that may not be what ultimately takes you to be with him someday, but it may. And it's just a faith walk, isn't it?
Well, it is. It is truly a faith walk for all of us. And I recognize that, there's some people that the Lord will allow to go into remission and stay in remission the rest of their life, and like you say, die of something else, die of old age. And that's beautiful. That's beautiful. It gives them opportunity to continue living. I mean, living abundantly, because truly you do. You live differently. You do live differently. When you have faced mortality, you live differently, Penna. But then, of course, I always said it's a win-win, because if the Lord takes us home, oh, my goodness, we're made whole, and we get to be with all those that went before us, and no one in heaven wants to come back, right? So it's a win-win either way, and I pray through the book, and truly as I talk to people, Penna, it really is to give people hope and encouragement where they are, and to look at life with just as an adventure.
I think it does that. It does do that.
It does.
Ladies and gentlemen, one more segment with Carmen. Give us a call, 800-351-1212. We'll be back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Donna Dunbar and her husband Clarence love to serve their community in Port Charlotte, Florida. They founded a soup kitchen at which they donated over 4,000 volunteer service hours, an act that won them the President's Volunteer Service Award. But things aren't as rosy at their condominium. Donna is a lay minister in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. She welcomes a few of her friends to the social room at her condo each week for a Bible study. The room is used by lots of people. Some play games there. There's a weekly poker game and even a regular movie night for all to attend. Until recently, Donna's Bible study was no big deal. But without any announcement or warning, the Condo Association Board adopted a resolution putting an end to the use of the common areas of the condo for religious purposes, including Donna's Bible study. Someone even put a sign on the organ in the room that said, "Any and all Christian music is banned." First Liberty Institute filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development alleging that Donna's condo broke the law with such a discriminatory policy and asking Secretary Ben Carson to undertake an investigation into the matter. After all, such unequal treatment of citizens shows hostility to religion and violates federal law and the First Amendment. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to the final segment of Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, and my guest is Carmen Pate. And a lot of people know Carmen Pate as a person who is, at her core, pro-life. And a good chunk, Carmen, of your life and ministry has been spent on your passion for protecting the unborn and also ministering to women in unplanned pregnancies. You worked in pregnancy centers and also ministering to people who have had abortions. And then there's the policy side of that. That's the hat I want you to put on for a minute, if you wouldn't mind with me. Because right now in the culture, we are seeing states like New York or Virginia tried to talking about solidifying a quote-unquote right to very, very late-term abortion. And then we see other states that, for instance, there was a heartbeat bill introduced in Texas recently. So they're very, very early prohibiting abortion. So do you see everybody sort of getting ready for the perhaps reversal of Roe versus Wade?
Well, I think there is more discussion than ever, it seems, Penna, now about life. You have the extremists who are promoting abortion, really pushing the late-term abortions, as well as, denying that there are abortion survivors. We have this really infanticide issue going on, and what seems to be the acceptance of that, of not protecting children who have been who were born, who were that were not taken by the abortion alive, and yet that desire to see those children die, it is shocking to me, particularly having been in this pro-life movement for 30 plus years now. I truly did not think that we would get to this point. I think so. That's the horrible side of it. The fact that we're even talking about protecting children outside of the womb. We shouldn't have to do that. But to your point, I think the blessing of this is that there is more discussion about protecting life now than there was before. I think there is a rally call, if you will, among those who are pro-life that maybe have become apathetic and just kind of sitting along the sidelines. So, yes, I think there will be a major push to see Roe v. Wade overturned in the Supreme Court. I think that there will be a major push from the other side, Penna, to continue taking life, whether it be in the womb, outside the womb, taking life. There is such a death culture that we're dealing with. It's horrific.
Yeah, and of course, the other part of it is forcing other people to pay for abortion. And I just can't, I find it very hard to believe that we have been unable to muster up the will to defund Planned Parenthood on the federal level.
Yes, it is astounding to see the money that they make from killing children. And then, of course, just the rhetoric that we hear from the likes of Planned Parenthood. Even their former president, Cecile Richard, just recently was tweeting about the fact that, those late-term abortions, they're only done when it's the health of the mother or if the life of the child is at risk, and it's, very rare. Well, yes, they are very rare, but Penna, even the Guttmacher Institute, which is their survey institute belonging to Planned Parenthood, even in their surveys, they show that 80% of women who choose abortion after 21 weeks, it's not for the life of the mother. It's not because their baby is in danger of dying anyway. As a matter of fact, what they found is that mostly it's because these are women who are raising children alone, that maybe they are in a domestic violence situation, which are horrible things. But they also mention like the use of illicit drugs, or they just couldn't decide soon enough. But so all of those, yes, those are horrible reasons, but those are reasons that can be overcome without taking the life of the child. And so I think it's important for those of us who are pro-life, Penna, to continue talking about the two issues that the pro-abortion side hate, and that is late-term abortions and that is abortion survivors. If we keep talking about the truth of those issues, I think that hearts are pricked, that consciences are pricked. so people realize we are talking about children here. And I think we have to just keep talking about it.
Yeah. Because we had a 10-year debate over partial birth abortion, and I feel that, I've always said a picture's worth 1,000 words, and this was a picture that the American people could not ignore. And so we're finally able to overturn, make it illegal and then uphold that in the Supreme Court. And these battles are not short, are they? They take years.
No. They do take years, and we've seen that, Penna. As long as you and I have been in the pro-life movement, we've seen it takes years and years. It takes a lot of hard work. I'm so grateful for those attorneys who are pro-life attorneys who continue to fight that battle. I know the funding needs to be there because certainly the other side receives tremendous amount of funding out of Hollywood. Just the liberal media that again just promotes that death culture. But we should be encouraged, Penna, in that the next generation. There are so many young people today who are pro-life, who do get it, who will be a voice, and they need our encouragement and our support. It's a battle. The Lord is going to win this battle, and I want to be on His side. Yeah. When it's won.
Okay, Carmen. Well, I just want to tell you thank you so much for joining me. I was sorry that you couldn't come to the studio. I was looking forward to seeing you, but I'm glad to be able to talk to you, and I'm glad to be able to present this book to the Point of View audience. Again, you can get it, as Carmen said, on Amazon. It's In Our Weakness, God is Strong. And one of the things I didn't mention as you go through the book, in every chapter you have takeaways. And so the takeaway part of it, Carmen, I think is applicable to so many kinds of suffering. Can you just, we have about a minute left, but can you just kind of, what was your thought in including that?
Yes. I think the book is not for just people with cancer. It's for people who suffer in any way. So at the end of each chapter, I tried to have a chapter takeaway. What was this chapter trying to talk about? And it talked about suffering. And then a personal reflection. So you could say, okay, in my life, how does this particular chapter apply to me? And how can I use it to encourage myself in my own suffering or to encourage others?
Well, I loved it. And I recommend the book, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to thank you, Carmen, for being with me. I also want to thank Steve and Doug and Karen. And Kirby will be back in the saddle tomorrow, and I am so glad I was the one in the saddle today because this was a great privilege to get to talk to you, Carmen. God bless you.
Well, thank you, Penna, for having me on. It was a blessing, always a blessing to be with the Point of View audience. Thank you.
And Carmen was a blessing to the Point of View audience as co-host here and was here at a crucial time. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to mention our Point of View website again. You can go back and you can find the book Frank Wright discussed in our interview, Does the Bible Teach Socialism? Very simple arguments there. Go and get it. It's free.
Do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.